The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, and this is the Final Straw Radio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email so we know you're doing it. If you like, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. This week, we spoke with Romina and Cesar, who are members of the Black Rose Anarchist Federation in LA. We talk about what it's like organizing in a federation model of anarchism, about anarcho-communism, and tensions and points of unity between non-federation and federation organizing. We wanted to interview these folks in order to present another model of possible engagement for folks who perhaps are looking for ways to plug in. This conversation is somewhat introductory and diverges somewhat from our usual fare, but we hope you'll find it useful, and we welcome any feedback that you have. To see more on this project, you can visit www.blackrosefed.org.
Tonight, Sunday, the 5th of March, from 5 to 7:30 p.m. at Firestorm in Asheville, join Blue Ridge Anarchist Black Cross for an evening of solidarity in the form of letter writing for some long-term political prisoners, people who are locked up for their activism and resistance to systems of domination and oppression. Supplies will be provided, as well as copies of the March 2017 Prison Books Political Prisoners Birthday Calendar. More info can be found at brabc.noblogs.org.
On March 6, 2017, there will be a National Day of Action aimed at both Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf and Department of Corrections Secretary John Wetzel. The power is in the hands of the people. The only way to make these officials respond is through massive public pressure, so we are upping the ante. From 9 a.m. to 12 noon, folks are being asked to call, fax, and tweet both the office of the Pennsylvania Governor, Tom Wolf, and the Department of Corrections Secretary, John Wetzel. We will be providing that information on our blog post. These are the demands. 1. Inmates at SCI Mahoney are provided immediately with clean water, both for their bathing and other personal needs. 2. An Environmental Protection Agency testing of the water at both SCI Mahoney and SCI Frackville. 3. Bottled water be provided immediately to inmates in all correctional facilities across Pennsylvania. Let's keep the pressure on to get clean water for the men and women across Pennsylvania's state prisons. For more info, people can go to freemumia.com, also bringmumiahome.com.
On Sunday, March 12th, at the Auditorium in Asheville, there will be a benefit for folks facing charges attached to the J20 inauguration protests in D.C. this January. The door is at 8 p.m. There's a request for sliding scale donations, and it's an all-ages show. Bands include Gullible Boys, Mother Moses, Maitland, and more to be announced. On Thursday, March 23rd, there will be a transmission book packaging party at Firestorm also. Transmission Prison Project is an all-volunteer books and zines to prisoners project that focuses on getting materials to incarcerated LGBTQI prisoners. The event starts at 6 p.m.
But first, here are some words from anarchist prisoner Shawn Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll call like a
I think part of what has historically maintained the relative peace and tranquility that we witness in the United States is the mythology of the middle class. Where there's class consciousness everywhere else in the world, it doesn't exist here. It starts with the narrative that's fed to all of us, a powerful narrative that defies all reason and logic, that tells us that we can all pull ourselves up by our proverbial bootstraps, and we can either succeed or fail based upon our merits and hard work. There's absolutely no basis in fact whatsoever for this stinking of a story, of course. but it seems to serve its purpose by planting itself deep into our minds whether we like it or not. Even a superficial questioning of this bootstraps narrative proves its falsity. Slaves and their descendants are still awaiting a paycheck for their hard work, while folks like Kim Kardashian appear to roll in the proverbial dough for being skilled at absolutely nothing at all. So the idea of American exceptionalism based on everyone getting exactly what they earn is provably as real as magical beans. But it serves the purpose of mitigating in our collective psyche the sense of outrage and indignation that the undeserving rich are both undeserving and rich. This narrative, as provably false as it is, stops all of us from picking up pitchforks and torches to subject the ruling elite to the rude justice that they objectively deserve. That's half of it, I suspect. But the other half is this unique American sense of classlessness. In the U.S., unlike everywhere else in the world, we have been cleansed of our sense of class. It isn't just that the lower class, the poor, do not resent or harbor animosity toward the upper class or rich. It isn't even that the poor idolize the rich and watch them religiously on reality TV shows. It's that the lower class are completely and utterly unaware that they are in the lower class. Likewise, the rich are completely and utterly unaware that they are in the upper class. Now, before you roll your eyes and tell me I'm nuts, hear me out. I'm not saying that the poor are unaware that they're poor. They know they're poor. They just don't know that by being poor, that makes them economically the lower class. If you ask them, they'll tell you they are middle class. The extremely poor, who are aware of their extreme poverty, may even, if pressured, admit that they are part of the lower middle class. But they identify as middle class nonetheless. Likewise, the rich know they're rich. But most rich people identify as middle class. Perhaps they will concede being upper middle class, but they, just like the extremely poor, are self-identifying members of the middle class. For Americans, despite whatever actual class they belong, identification with the middle class is mandatory to the American self-image. This identification is not based upon the size of the paychecks or the geographical location where one lives, but based upon a personal affinity with middle-class values, whatever those are. And it matters not that rich, middle-class Republican white folks espouse totally diametrical middle-class values to poor, struggling minority Democrat folks who identify with entirely different middle-class values. That is, middle-class values are kind of like a Rorschach ink blot. They include so many opposing values that middle-class values don't even really exist. But, what's more, the middle class doesn't exist. And what I mean is, there is no middle class in America, and it really hasn't existed in almost 70 years. Economic and political forces have created a widening gap between the essentially workless wealthy and the overworked poor. There's really nothing in between. So not only is membership in the middle class and identification with middle class values a complete myth, but the middle class itself is as real as unicorns or leprechauns. You can no more be a member of the middle class in America than you can be on the Olympic team for the land of Oz. And yet, hundreds of millions of Americans have been drinking the proverbial Kool-Aid, all feeling some immediate resonance when swindling politicians speak of the middle class and middle class values. This unifying identification has kept us all going along with the same program, accepting our assigned seats in the common classroom of our common class. This middle class mythology has worked well to keep the growing population of the dispossessed from rising up collectively against their very real class enemy in an orgasm of insurrectionary blood and fire. The middle class lie has served the privileged elite very well. Well, until now. There is no middle class. There are only masters and slaves. Everyone act accordingly. This is Anarchist Prison.
This call is originating from an Ohio correctional facility and may be recorded and monitored.
I really hate that lady. This is Anarchist prisoner Shawn Swain from Warren Correctional in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Shawn Swain at Shawn Swain 243-205, Warren CI, P.O. Box 120, 5787 State Route 63, Lebanon, Ohio, 45036. Updates on his situation and more writings by Shawn can be found at shawnswain.org. And I am here speaking with Romina and Cesar from Black Rose Anarchist Federation in Los Angeles. Hey, y'all, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for having us.
Would y'all mind introducing yourselves and talking a little bit about what you do?
My name is Romina. I currently am teaching Latin American history at Cal State here in Los Angeles. My family is from Chile, and I've had, I guess, a very long political history from both my family and myself, too. And I was part of, like, the founding of Black Rose a few years back. And, yeah.
So, hey, my name is Cesar. I guess I'm a graphic designer. I do a lot of, like, different design work and stuff. But first and foremost, I would say that I am a communist who happens to do art. Here in LA, I'm based out of like South Central, and so I guess to me what's more important is like organizing like my community, and so I'm more involved in like doing community organizing around here. And my family came from Mexico probably in the 80s. And so, first generation, indigenous person living in LA.
Gotcha. Romina, you mentioned you had been instrumental in founding Black Rose. I was wondering if y'all would talk a little bit about the Anarchist Federation, specifically Black Rose / Rosa Negra specifically, and what the membership is like, and a little bit about y'all's mission statement.
Okay, I can start with the kind of the background of the founding, and maybe Cesar can go into the membership and some other things. About the founding of the organization, it took several years, and it was several organizations that already existed prior that were part of these discussions that were in conferences that were known as the Class Struggle Anarchist Conferences. And over the course of several years, it was like trying to find where the different groups had similarities and where they didn't. I actually was not part of those discussions. And interestingly enough, I'm still friends with people who were part of those conferences, but actually never ended up joining Black Rose. And so anyways, it was a lot broader than who ended up being actually in the organization. Why did we decide on forming a specific anarchist organization, as it says in our mission statement? Part of the legacy, or the historical legacy of it, is that I think there's a mistake sometimes in only referring to our legacy as related to Macno, but the idea of a specific anarchist organization is that we need a place to be organized where we can develop and organize our ideas and to try to coordinate better. It's not the same as a political party because we don't have a kind of hierarchical structure, and we still have the autonomy of our locals as well. But I think why we think it's necessary is that the capitalist class is extremely organized. They're organized not only by the state, but they're organized by other institutions. And through that kind of organization, they are able to coordinate. And unfortunately, because our only way to fight back is to have a certain amount of coordination, and it's why we need an organization. The term specific anarchist organization comes from the Uruguayan Anarchist Federation that was founded in the 1950s, and they use that term. And that's why we actually use it too, because we actually have a historical kind of lineage with them.
And was that crew in Uruguay that was an anarchist federation?
Yeah, the
Cool.
Uruguayan Anarchist Federation. They're still around today.
That's awesome.
I would say that the thing that makes Black Rose, I guess, different is that what we're trying to create isn't necessarily like a clubhouse or an organization that anyone can join. So that kind of sounds like those are two different ends. But I would say that on one hand, we're not trying to build a mass party. We're not trying to build any of these organizations that just want people to join so that they can organize through them. But we're also not trying to just like close ourselves off to people. So in the work that we do, like this organization is mostly for us to organize ourselves. And through the work that we're doing, the common organizing that we're doing with folks, that's where we extend like an invitation if it makes sense for people. But the primarily like the work is in the areas of organizing that we're in. So for me, whenever I talk to people in my community about Black Rose, I rarely use the name. I just say, oh yeah, my political organization, this and this and that. And so people like know I'm part of an organization, but to me, like the first and foremost important thing is building with folks, like building popular organizations that people could join. Yeah. The federation is more just like for me to be organized, like with other folks who have, common politics and have a shared strategy.
Definitely. I'm really, really happy to be talking to y'all because in no small part, and there's so many things that I'm really, really curious about, not only about Rosa Negra, but about LA specifically and organizing as in an anarchist sort of way in LA. But I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the model of like Anarchist Federation organizing, because I'm not all that aware if the Final Straw has many listeners who are part of like the Federation model of organizing. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind describing what that means and for folks who aren't aware of it. And I'm also wondering if you wouldn't mind specifically touching upon the part in your mission statement where it focuses on where it talks about like the revolutionary potential of the working class.
So to me, from I guess my experience of Federation, we have like different locals around the U.S., right? And so each and every one of them is autonomous. They, for the most part, like they're not being told by the Federation what they have to do or anything like that. But we are part of a federation because it means that we have, a tactical unity and strategic unity. Basically, all that really means is that we agree on certain like things that we want to get done, and we agree on how we want to get those things done. And we feel that we have to, be accountable to each other. If that makes sense. So, like, if one group is saying that they're gonna do something with another group, then they should be able to keep their word, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way that I guess federations work is that it's not just like a loose network where people are just like, oh yeah, we're part of this, but more so, in our organization, everyone has a delegate for their local, and that delegate is part of like a delegate council. And so if we need someone to represent us in this larger like decision-making body, that's kind of like where that happens. I don't know if Romina wants to help me out with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was described well. And for example, sometimes when we have inquiries about joining Black Rose, we can have like a group of people who live in a city who want to join. And so as they would have to join as a local, I mean, we have some people that are also at large. We do discourage that because the political work you can carry out when you're working with other people is radically different than working as an individual. And I think that is probably the hardest transition that we're having, where anarchism in the United States for so long has been a lot of individual initiatives, but now trying to have collective discussions and collective decisions and being accountable to follow through, it shows a different level of commitment, and that's what identifies us differently from being a network. And that's why, being a member of the organization requires a certain amount of commitment. Oh, and the last thing I think you asked about, where we talk about the revolutionary potential of the working class. I think, Black Rose is an anarchist communist organization. And so we do agree with the historic understanding that the working class, as those who are oppressed, really have nothing to lose but their chains. And their revolutionary potential is not just that, but also their labor power, their relationship to it. And one of the difficulties in trying to rebuild social movements at this time in the United States, and right now we're at a moment where we are in dire need of social movements, and is that it's for people to realize their potential and their power, because capitalism is organized and built on convincing workers that they're just selling their labor, but they're actually the producers of everything. And if we actually want to reorganize society to be equal and just, and where we can have access to education and to food and to health care and all these other things, we're going to have to radically reorganize society. And the working class is the one who wants to reorganize the society in the way, or can reorganize it in a way that is not concerned about status and moving upward in the world, but actually trying to create an equal society.
That was the part of your mission statement that I was wondering most about, just because as an anarchist, I wonder what you think about this too. And I ask this question not in order to be like oppositional or to create like an uncomfortable situation, but merely just so that we can have discourse. And if you're uncomfortable with it, then we can move on for sure.
No.
But I'm wondering about what you think about this, like, critique of models which look at like revolutionary potential of the working class, and take it as that, but also like, do you see in your like interfaces with the working class that there is like huge diversity with like within like the politics, because like the working class is such a huge demographic, and like there's the white working class, and then there's POC working classes, and do you see any differences between like how you interface with different members of the working class, or like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
I really like that question. do you wanna?
I can say some words first.
Yeah, go for it.
The working class is definitely not homogeneous. What our commonality is also historic and economic, but it's definitely our commonality is not cultural or racial or gendered or any of those things, right? And I think that's one. I think it's a very, very difficult thing to organize around. But also in the United States, it's become more difficult, I think, because the historic left has actually turned its back on the working class. And I mean the left, like the big left, right? Various sectors of the U.S. left. And one thing that's very noticeable in the United States in comparison to other parts of the world, and especially in South America, where I've spent a lot of time, is that in South America, you do have a very heterogeneous working class as well. But there is a level of class consciousness and understanding that does create a culture of solidarity, which I feel like the culture of solidarity within the working class has really been broken. And part of it never existed because of white supremacy. So the challenges are manifold, and we have to be aware of that. But also, I think that it's worth fighting for. I've worked many years in factories where I had most of my coworkers were Latino and immigrants, but I also had coworkers that were white, and I worked in factories in Ohio and Iowa as well. And I do remember having debates with coworkers about abortion, about the legality of it, especially in a time period where they were talking about partial birth abortion, and other debates with them about immigration. And, sometimes I was able to convince people, and sometimes I wasn't. But also, when something came down at work and the bosses were attacking you, I was always shocked to see about the solidarity that would also sprung up within people who, like, I had coworkers who were from Serbia and others who were Croatians who on a daily basis would hate each other. But then all of a sudden something would happen in work and I would see them, unify. It's one of those things that it has to be fought for, and it's not just going to be created naturally, I don't think. But I know Cesar has some stuff to say.
Yeah, I think that's like very reflective of what we are in the U.S. As the left, and I think it's primarily due to like this, this love for postmodernism and for identity politics, and I don't know, it makes it so that people are organizing around their identity as opposed to like the shared material needs that they have. And so it's easier for folks to be like, oh, well, this person is brown like me, so they must, have some sort of solidarity. So people try to create solidarity without actually, like, putting in work. And so to me, I think one of the most important things is, creating struggle or struggling with people. Because if you're not struggling with people, then everything just remains stagnant. And only through, like, struggle can you actually get to, like, a better, understanding of the world. And so, because of that, I would say that, like what Romina was saying, that the working class is not homogenous, but our aim is to, like, get people to recognize that they're getting, they're getting oppressed by, a common enemy. And so how can we, like, work towards getting everyone to see that we have, our liberation, tied with each other, right? And it's not going to be easy, but it's, at the end, it's worthwhile, and it's something powerful.
And especially since the Trump election, I think that they're in political spheres that are on the far left. There has been this real need located among, like, radical members of specifically the white working class, because as a body, it's been said that, like, the white working class is an entity in times of stress that gets pushed toward the right historically. So, like, I think that locating that need for, like, members of the rad left white working class to go in, talk to their comrades or to their, community as, like, other white working class people and try to combat that political push, I think is a very important thing too, in addition to everything that y'all said.
Yeah.
And it has been done historically.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so interesting, because, like, there's been moments in history where, like, Kansas was heavily socialist, and, like, other areas like that in mid-America. But it was because, white workers went out there and, and spoke to them and convinced them. But yeah, it can only be, I like, there's, the term, the battle of ideas, because it's true. Like, we can't just sit back and say, like, oh, there's something, they're just gonna, people just organically become, starts going to fascism or going to socialism or whatever. I mean, like, honestly, you have to fight for these ideas. You have to fight for people to hear you. Definitely.
I feel like we could probably talk about this for a really long time, but I'm really curious about, like, as folks who are involved in an Anarchist Federation, and maybe Cesar, you identified as a communist at the beginning. I'm wondering about what your experience is, both, like, good and bad, of working with non-Federation anarchists or, like, non-Federation communists, if there is such a thing, and how have those experiences sat with you, and what are some points of, like, unity that you've found and some points of contention?
Yeah, so when I say that I am a communist, like, I say it in the sense of, like, I'm an anarchist, but I'm also a communist. There's a reason why there is, like, our tendency of anarchist communism, And so at times I'm too communist for the anarchists, quote unquote anarchists, and sometimes I'm too anarchist for the communists. And so I'm kind of in this like in between, but I think it's a good balance. And so I guess like my experience with dealing with folks who aren't necessarily into Federation kind of has been, very much like, I don't know, like there are some people who they may be, very individualist because of this. And I have this thing where I kind of am breaking up with the left, with the quote unquote left. Because to me, what's more important is everyday people that I talk to, everyday people who I share material needs with. And so I think this is something that we've talked a lot about in LA, how instead of like focusing on the same old like clubhouse, scene of like anarchism in LA, like we want to just do like these things on a broader scale with like the people that we're involved with every day. But for the most part, like if someone is down to work with me and we have something like that we're working towards together, like, yeah, I'm going to work with them. But usually, like, I think people get too stuck in like ideological purism and stuff that they kind of just like, oh, I'm more anarchist than you. And it's like, well, that's nice, but what power are you building and how is that helping people get the things that they need?
Yeah, it's always like when politics becomes this sort of like pissing game of ideological purity, I think it's become something else. As far as like solidarity with other federations goes, is there like a model for general or like local and regional assemblies, or are folks interfederational folks like organized in different ways to like assemblies or listservs or anything like that?
Yes, we do try to coordinate listservs. I don't know that, not really. But right now we're in the middle of helping form a new local in the Bay Area, which, we do travel up there and help organize that. And I think, part of our work, one of the things that we're trying to ground ourselves in right now, and as you guys were just talking about the moving away from being ideologically driven and instead being driven by like the material realities and what's going on right now, I think is representative of our work and how we work with other locals. Because, for example, some locals will have more commonality of work because of demographics, because of various social movements that are happening in those two cities. So that's where we can find our commonality of like coordinating together, right? And versus like other areas. And I think that's been one of the arguments that's some years ago. Some people felt like a federation couldn't work because the United States is so different in so many different places. But we've been able to coordinate various work that is similar in some places. For example, Cesar can talk to this more, but especially areas like tenant organizing around Black Lives Matter protests and other police brutality stuff, and as well, and also incarcerated workers as well has been another area.
Yeah, within the federation, there's different committees that are, I guess, based on different issues. And so one of the committees is the Housing and Territorial Committee, which focuses on doing day-to-day like community organizing, but also tenant organizing. And this committee like is doing a lot of either like folks are involved in solidarity networks or people are involved in tenant unions, and so the committee serves as a way to bring those folks together who are doing that work to talk about how can we as an organization move forward with a strategic plan. And so not just like, oh, this is what we're doing here. Oh, this is what we're doing. Cool. Like we had this talk. Like, no, it's more like what are we doing together as an organization? How are we pushing that that I guess that whole plan? How are we pushing it, and how can we support each other in pushing it? And so, if let's say theoretically, right, if we were a little bit more organized in the future, to the point where if one city decides, hey, we're gonna do a tenant strike here, and we need people in LA to also, do a tenant strike, a rent strike, then like coordinating something like that, where all locals are doing something at the same time, is much more effective if you're trying to get like a national target or something, right? Yeah. And so I would say that's like a way that the different like locals within the federation really do a lot of common organizing is through the community work. And like Ramiro was saying, that like usually it ends up being like the people who are either closest to you or the people who have like similar membership are the ones that tend to kind of like be the ones who reach out to you more. Yeah. Because y'all are doing pretty much the same thing for the most part. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we don't stay in contact with with everyone, because we also have our delegate council, that every local has like someone that represents them, that helps to be on that committee to like give updates and pass word, all that other stuff.
This like idea of, or this like very real reality of trying to organize. It's really interesting for me to see like what different people in different geographical places will focus on to organize, and what I'd really love to hear your experiences about and your opinions about is organizing in LA specifically. LA, I heard some time ago, is one of the, if not the most like quote diverse sections in the world. Diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, and in terms of socioeconomic status as well. And
Yeah.
I would love to hear your opinions about like how it's been to organize with like solidarity with like immigrants and undocumented people right now is a huge issue for a lot of really solid reasons. I'm wondering about your experiences in doing that you'd care to talk about on the radio, and also like your opinions on the most effective strategies to be in accompliceship with immigrant folks.
Well, I think one of the things that's happening right now that we're seeing like I guess a trend of is that people are holding popular assemblies specifically to talk about like the immigration policies that are being passed by this regime. And so for those who don't know what a popular assembly is, it's basically a tool that we use to get people to come together and talk about the issues in their community, and then from that we collectively figure out how to solve certain issues. So a popular assembly is just like a meeting for like anyone who is part of an affected community. And so far, there's been folks that have held popular assemblies in Koreatown, in Watts recently. There was one in Pasadena. There was originally a call by the National Day Labor Organizing Network that called for like a citywide assembly, and so that's where like a lot of these smaller assemblies came out of. And so there's a lot of like, I guess, networking happening with Andy Lawn and other folks, but for the most part, it really depends on like whoever's putting the assembly together. And so I think how people can support undocumented folks is very dependent on like what the communities themselves are saying. One really big thing that we're seeing right now that everyone is jumping on is when there's a warning that ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement folks are out. People usually blast it on social media, and so people are trying to be more cautious with, like, if there is like a warning, how can someone go check it, and how can someone verify this, and then how can we have like a rapid response network and stuff. And so there are like different like hotlines and apps and stuff that people are trying to create or have created as a response to that. And I would say that because LA is really, really huge and really diverse, there's like a huge immigrant population here. And so it's kind of hard not to be involved in a lot of that stuff. Like, I think almost every group has like a position on that, And so I guess it's more so because of those shared like material circumstances and stuff. So I guess like if people are affected by it, they're gonna be doing something about it. Yeah.
The only thing I can add is that that where I teach, a lot of stuff has come up also, and the stuff that I've seen develop from both the faculty and from the students has been to push to create a sanctuary for some of the schools to become sanctuary places as well. And there's been more and more in discussion on how to do this and how to protect, our own students, and for students to be able to be empowered and organize themselves as well. So I'm glad to see that there's a lot of response in the city to what's happening, even though there's already been some raids have been carried out. But I think some of the more on the ground assembly stuff that Cesar mentioned are probably going to be are really the fruits of people being able to create popular power, which is very different from an institution where I work to, trying to like put a Band-Aid on things.
I feel that so hard, what you said, Cesar, with what solidarity will very much look like what people are saying. Like, for instance, just to answer my own question, to like put Asheville in context, there was a call from like people in Asheville for basically like a push asking for a solidarity with a project for like subverting the common narrative about immigration in the United States, which of course is like extremely racist and extremely stagnant. So there's this like call for like a cultural intervention on the part of the anarchist community in Asheville, which is mostly white. I was wondering also about Rosa Negra's relationship to and praxis around feminism and anarcho-feminism, because that shows up in the mission statement as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this article that Brie and I wrote called Breaking the Waves, we were actually kind of writing about something that we've seen a long time, and what we saw like the anarchist feminism kind of language and practices in anarchist circles for a very long time, in which when people would say, what is anarchist feminism? Usually people were like, I don't know what to call it. How do you define it? And part of the problem that we noticed is that it was mostly like a more radical or more seemed like more aggressive and radical towards a form of feminism, but it wasn't clear of how it really broke with liberal feminism, because a lot of times it didn't, and sometimes there was some kind of commonality. And one of the problems that we saw is that there was still kind of this reliance. Like, we saw a lot of anarchist feminists who I think mostly learned their feminist ideas from college, which it's a great place to also learn about feminism. Strangely enough, even though I am a college professor, I actually never took any feminist courses in college. So I took one very late, but I kind of stayed away from them because I felt like they were not representative of the type of feminism I was trying to organize around. So what we were trying to do in these writings was to kind of spark a discussion about trying to rebuild both an anarchism and the feminism that was based on these politics, being clear where we stood, since there's so many different types of anarchisms and so many different types of feminism, and to be at those roots. And for us, it's really going to, again, like the class kind of language that we've been using, a working class feminism. What does that mean? What is it that working class women need right now, right? And to begin with that, and to put, ideology is great, but we're going to have to put that to the side right now, and to get back at those material things, like, the question of like childcare, the question of labor, the question of healthcare, the problem that most women's clinics are private. And, there's still sectors of society who don't have access to them, who can't afford them. There's all these kind of other questions that need to be dealt with that are also nuanced according to, experiences of race and gender identity and all this other stuff as well. But that's what we wanted to push against of returning to that. It might not be as flashy. It might not sound as radical, but it's something we need. And one of the things that's happening right now is that liberal feminism is outflanking revolutionary feminism. They have the platform, and they have the voice, and they're the ones who are like the main kind of like voice that's coming out of like these women's marches and stuff like that. But they're not going to push for the socialization of healthcare and for the socialization of childcare and things like that, because they're not interested in that. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of where we come from on feminism. And we've actually organized various meetings in LA on that topic as well. And we've brought over a woman from Argentina who's who's done a lot of territorial work in Argentina and talked about her experiences of building feminist politics in an unemployed movement. And I think, and it was very, very well attended. It was about over 100 people who came to that.
And what was that article that you mentioned called again?
Breaking the Waves.
Breaking the Waves.
You can find it through the Institute of Anarchist Studies website, and you can also find it at the Black Rose website.
That's awesome. That sounds like an awesome article.
I mean, Romina said it all. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel, But I would also want to add that there's like this tendency of folks in anarchism who tend to view anarcho-feminism as anything that women anarchists do. And so I think to just name something anarcho-feminism just because it's something that a woman does, kind of like, I don't know, it just makes that the word itself not really mean much. And so, like, is someone a feminist just because they're a woman, or are they a feminist because there's certain politics that are tied to it? And what are these politics? And I think, like, the Breaking the Waves, like, piece is, like, very, like, instrumental in, like, challenging these ideas, too. So it's, like, for anyone who hasn't read it, go read it now. The thing is awesome.
Something that, Romina, that you said that kind of stood out to me is, like, you said something like, oh, this might not seem so radical, or this might not seem like as radical as some people are like used to, or whatever. Like I super want to like give a lot of voice to that, and like give a lot of voice to that tendency in anarchism to be like, oh, it doesn't feel this certain way, to like talk about it, so it's not like a thing that we're gonna give any of our like psychological energy to or anything like that. And I think that's a really important thing to always be talking about. Yeah, and also the like watering down of anarcha-feminism as being like, oh, you're a woman, you're a feminist. Well, like, that's not entirely true, because patriarchy just infects everyone. It's just the toxic nature of the thing. Definitely. I have only just one, like, more substantial question and then, like, two smaller ones if y'all have energy for that. How are y'all feeling?
Yeah, good.
Awesome. I was curious about a phrase in your mission statement which goes, quote, "We see the need to build a specifically anarchist organization united around a common set of ideas, strategy, and practice." And I'm curious about your definition of and relationship to strategy and practice. And would you speak about this as much as you care to?
César, ¿quiere hablar sobre eso?
To me, strategy just means like, how are you gonna get the things that you want, and the practice piece is like, how are you actually putting that into practice? I think a lot of people have this idea of like, well, we're revolutionaries, and so we're just against this. We're anti this, anti this, anti this, and it becomes very much just like defining yourself through like what you're against, but there's no emphasis on what are the things that we want and how are we going to get them? How are we building power to get these things collectively? And so for us, strategy has to be something that isn't just like one person saying like, well, I think this is how we're going to get it, but it has to be a collective process. And the most important thing about strategy is like putting it into practice and actually going out and trying these things out. And if they don't work, then we have to reassess, what are we doing wrong and how can we change that so that we get closer to our goal? Because I don't know about y'all, but I actually want to win stuff, I'm in it to win it, And if we don't have that mentality, then it's like, why are we organizing in the first place? Like, why are we like having this thought that we're just going to be defeated? Like for me, like I want the whole damn thing,
Are there any like upcoming events in LA or like around the country that you wanted to promote or signal boost?
I mean, I think a lot of the events are, every so often we do try to organize like our own events. Not that often. I don't think we have anything specifically, like scheduled right now. But obviously the March 8th marches on International Women's Day in LA, it's going to be on the 5th. But I think there's going to be marches all around the country on the 8th, which is very interesting since this is a day commemorated, for around the world. Like is it also a historic memory of the shirtwaist massacre, which garment workers died, but it's also related to to socialist women's fight for struggle in the United States. It has not been celebrated, and the other thing is to start preparing now for May Day. Start organizing now, talking to people, getting ideas. Create alliances. It's a great opportunity to organize around and get to know organizations and get to know people and find commonality and to show. I mean, those demonstrations are not going to be the revolution, but they're a great way to build popular power and get to know people and start to gain trust, which we need right now. But César might know of other events that I might not be aware of since I'm not on top of things sometimes.
And I think what you said was just perfect. It's like there are events, but they're usually just very like particular to a certain community. Like, what good does it do for me to invite the whole world to a popular assembly that's for like one certain community, But I guess like what Romina was saying, that there's these events that are happening every year, like International Women's Day and International Workers' Day, and so it's like just go out there and just do it. Use it as a place to like talk to people and make connections.
Yeah. And bring drums and music and banners and stuff.
Yeah.
And
if anyone's interested in a revolutionary choir, we should link up,
That's so awesome. Is that a project that's starting in LA? A revolutionary choir?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Something
we're always trying to do that.
It kind of happened like the last year or the year before. It was an idea that we threw out, and we kind of only like practiced like probably once, and it wasn't anything that was like too planned out. But I think just yesterday my partner was like, yo, like let's do that quiet idea. Yeah. And so if there's enough interest, then it would be really cool, like just to have a lot of old commie songs and probably some new commie songs to sing along,
Yeah, definitely. There's so much good revolutionary music from around the world that and there has been revolutionary choirs too, and I haven't seen one in a really long time. So I think that would be really fucking cool.
Yeah.
And this idea of talking to people, going to things and talking to people is so crucial, I think, right now, because anarchism and not just anarchism, but strategies on the far, far left are gaining some sort of national visibility. So that's really cool to just give a face to that to folks who might not have that. How can people learn more information about Rosa Negra?
BlackRoseFed.org. That's BlackRoseFed.org.
It's in English and Spanish, right?
Yes. And there's contacting there too if you're interested in contacting various locals or various other areas too. There's something that you can fill out and write to directly there. And most of our locals can be found on Facebook too, as well.
Awesome. Romina and Cesar, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to make this interview happen. It's been really great for me to hear your words and your experiences.
For sure. Feel free to hit us up anytime.
Thanks. You too, if there's ever a need for some anarchist media that y'all have, this is a resource that is at people's disposal, and it will be there. That was our conversation with Romina and Cesar of Black Rose Anarchist Federation in LA. You can get up. You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, and this is The Final Straw Radio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email so we know you're doing it. If you like, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.